October 27th, 2018, a day Pittsburgh will never forget.
I can confirm that 11 people lost their lives today at Tree of Life Synagogue.
A normal Saturday morning became an unimaginable nightmare.
This happened in a place where I spent every Saturday morning for the last 35 years.
An unthinkable hatred shattered one of the city's most peaceful neighborhoods.
Look, there's hate in this world, but we have to have tolerance.
Shock turned to heartbreak.
We've come to a moment in time where it gets too personal and too close.
Then heartbreak into unity as the city stood together, stronger than hate. Now, a year later, we pause to remember.
Life is more precious now than it ever was.
To remember the 11 lives lost, the 2 survivors, the 4 police officers wounded while rushing in to help, and the day that changed Pittsburgh forever.
It's often said that time heals all wounds. Perhaps, but how much time? A month? A year? A lifetime?
This Sunday marks 1 year since a gunman walked into a synagogue in Squirrel Hill and killed these 11 people.
They were mothers, fathers, husbands, wives, grandparents, siblings, aunts, uncles, cherished friends.
For their loved ones, a year later, the healing continues.
As it also does for the congregations of Tree of Life, Dor Hadash, New Light, the greater Jewish community, and all of Pittsburgh.
So tonight, KDKA pays tribute as we remember and repair together.
Remember, repair together. A KDKA special.
Good evening. 13 worshipers were shot at Tree of Life.
Only 2 survived, Dan Leger and Andrea Wedner.
A year later, they are filled with appreciation.
Grateful to still be alive.
Grateful for the first responders who rescued them.
For the medical experts who saved them.
And for the community that's held them close.
But when I recently met with them, rather than focus on themselves, they were eager to honor the memories of the fellow congregants they lost. Dan Leger was shot in the torso, critically wounded. He spent weeks in the hospital. He's had multiple surgeries with more to come.
Well, when people ask me how I'm doing, I always say thank God. That's first. The sense of gratitude to be here, to be alive. And it's day to day. You know, today's a good day. There's some days that aren't so good.
Andrea Wedner was shot in the arm last October 27th. Her mother, with her at the synagogue, was shot and killed. Andrea's had 4 surgeries. So when people ask you, Andrea, how are you doing? Which I'm sure you've been asked a million times. What's your answer?
I'm okay. I'm good.
That may surprise people.
Yeah.
How do you account for what seems like a positive outlook?
The community, friends, family, the support that we've gotten from everybody. Yeah, life's good.
As the 2 who survived, Dan and Andrea share a unique bond, and they share a desire to keep alive the memories of those who were killed. At age 97, Andrea says her mother, Rose Mallinger, was sharp and filled with energy and warmth.
She lit up a room and she made everybody smile, and she liked being social. She just loved life.
Dan, your memories of Rose?
Well, the apple doesn't fall from the tree. When I think of Rose, I think of the 2 of you together because that's how I knew them.
Melvin Wax was 88. Some friends remember how he loved to tell corny jokes. Dan Leger knew another side of him.
He was a very serious fellow, so it's interesting for me to hear that he had a sense of humor because I didn't know that about him that way at all. To me, he was always a very serious, let's get down to Torah here. He was always dressed to the nines. There was a sweetness about him that was always very clear.
Sylvan and Bernice Simon are the couple remembered as always being together, true partners in life, married 62 years earlier at Tree of Life.
On the 27th, when we walked in, they were standing in the back right at the door to greet us. She always asked about my granddaughter and just loving, kind people.
He had a very gruff presence sometimes. He could be really rough around the edges and just sort of tell you like it was. And his wife was the great mediator in those episodes where he was showing his gruffness. They were really a well-matched
They were loving.
couple.
You could see
Very
she
loving.
took good care
Very
of him.
loving.
Dan Stein recently became a grandfather. You knew that because he talked about it?
I was overjoyed to have become a grandfather. This little guy, Henry, right, yeah. He was just so happy.
Irv Younger was another proud grandfather, always showing off pictures and always sharing a funny story or two.
Always the delayed punchline. You had to go through the whole preliminary to get to the awful punchline. Just a quiet, gentle, kind fella. And he had great hair.
He did.
Yeah, yeah.
Dan says Irv had a special bond with the two brothers who were killed, sensitive to their disabilities. But everyone who worshiped at the Tree of Life building considered Cecil and David Rosenthal friends.
I would walk in the chapel, and of course they were always there early, bright and early. And Cecil would say to me, "You look beautiful today," and tell my mother. One time he kissed my hand. He just was a good soul. And David was quiet.
Although Dan says to worship alongside David was moving.
To hear him pray, some of it was nonsense words, some of it was sort of pidgin Hebrew. It was from the heart. It was just totally from the heart.
And David had confided in Dan a special fondness for the congregation's cantor.
He would say, "I want to marry that Cheryl," you know? And then he said, "What does it mean to get married?" What's that mean, Dan? And so we talked a little about those things, but he was just this smiling, wonderful presence in the world. I miss David.
Joyce Feinberg had recently become more involved at Tree of Life, joining the board.
She was a lovely woman. She very kind and sweet, and she was always there early, and she had her own book, and she had pages marked with, you know, Post-it notes. Lovely, lovely lady.
But I remember her smile. She just had this absolutely genuine engagement in her face and in her eyes and her smile that was just really beautiful.
Dr. Richard Gottfried is remembered as a leader of his congregation, a big Pitt fan, and a dentist who often volunteered his expertise helping patients through Catholic charities. Dan and Andrea have since become close with his relatives.
We've learned a lot about him through his family, which has been great.
And they are all wonderful people, and we've just really developed warm relationships.
The death of Dr. Jerry Rabinowitz, beloved by his patients, hit many hard. He was Dan Legger's close friend.
I've heard so much about him in particular because as a physician, he touched so many people's lives.
Jerry was always the busiest person in the room and the first person to say, "I'll do it." So kind, so giving, so warm, so smart. He was the kind of guy that when anybody who he had ever known for 5 minutes was in the hospital, he was there in the morning to see them, not officially, not to do anything in the medical record or do anything other than to be there for them, let them know he cared. Jerry was a mensch.
For Dan Legger and Andrea Wedner, healing continues. And yet a year later, they feel lucky, blessed even, to have this city's embrace and to have each other.
We've had the opportunity to talk to people in other cities where there have been mass shootings. And they're amazed when they hear about Pittsburgh, because in Pittsburgh, the support that has been generated and the kindness that has been generated has been unique. Just want to say thank you.
And his wife. We're friends for life.
Just want to say thank you to the community. You know,
I second that.
To express our thanks.
Yes.
Everybody has been so kind.
We're very
so
grateful.
Giving. And I love you too.
I love you.
Dan and Andrea and the relatives of those killed continue to get together regularly for family support group meetings.
As for the 4 Pittsburgh police officers who were wounded that day, so far only one has returned to work. We will have more on them coming up.
Meantime, as those directly affected by the shooting continue to heal, so does all of Squirrel Hill.
A year later, the neighborhood is still trying to repair the fabric of the tight-knit, inclusive community. Here's Andy Sheehan.
It's long been known as Pittsburgh's Jewish neighborhood, and it's true. Jewish culture is the bedrock of Squirrel Hill. But over the past several decades, it's also become an ethnically diverse community where people of every stripe have made it their own.
It's an awesome neighborhood. You know, my father opened up an Italian restaurant in 1958, and all the Jewish people are like, what's this Italian guy doing?
Today, Minio's Pizza House is a Squirrel Hill institution.
Hey, Ron, how's everything?
And gathering place. And when a suspected anti-Semitic gunman targeted 3 congregations gathered in the Tree of Life, he drove a knife through the heart of this family-owned business and the entire community.
A lot of those people that got killed were, you know, they used to come in here and have a slice of pizza. You know, Irv Younger down the street. I've known him since I was this big, you know, and he lost his life over senseless things.
I think about those people like every day. They wake up and, you know, their families are just not the same.
Even a year later, on a beautiful fall afternoon like this one, the pain remains very close to the surface, an ever-present reality just underneath the din of everyday life.
You can go to 61C and you can be having a conversation and you can hear the other conversation in a table close to you about the massacre. You can't have a conversation with a friend or a neighbor for very long without that topic of October 27th coming up. It's there, it's raw, it's still here, I think, for all of us.
But through its collective grief, Squirrel Hill and all of its ethnic bearings have united in stark opposition to the hate and prejudice of the attack. Marty Eisler, the president of the Squirrel Hill Urban Coalition, says resiliency and unity are fountains of hope and promise for the future.
When the worst unimaginable happens, I think it does tend to bring out the best in people. And we saw that certainly the first night's vigil put on by students.
Within hours of the shooting, the neighborhood's young and old gathered together at this vigil organized by Taylor Alderdice students. And the past year has seen a steady stream of community events and fundraisers helping the victims' families and fighting violence.
But the hopefulness has to do with how the community came together, how the community can celebrate life at the same time that we respect and mourn those who were lost.
You try to go on with your day-to-day life. That's, you know, one way to make sure that those who hate don't win.
While some look for acceptance, others want change to come from all of this, gun control and other social reforms. Jonathan Mayo, who lives a block from the synagogue, is a member of the Jewish advocacy group Bend the Arc. It exposes white supremacy while promoting ethnic unity and social justice, not just after mass shootings like at the Tree of Life.
If we can truly come together on a regular basis and not just in times of this horrific tragedy, then I think we have a chance for a better society.
In the wake of this particular atrocity, Squirrel Hill has become a model for what that society might look like.
I think our community in Squirrel Hill just really gave hope that we can come through things like this and show people that it's not about the horrific thing that happened. It's about, you know, the love and the hope that came through after.
And so in many ways, Squirrel Hill's darkest hour has become its brightest shining moment. And by example, help unite the entire greater Pittsburgh community that love is indeed stronger than hate.
Squirrel Hill was always a hidden gem, and now it's a revealed gem. Everybody knows about it, everyone's talking about it, and I strongly believe, and I'm very proud of the example that we have set to the broader community as a whole.
And the nation.
And the nation, there's no doubt.
In the days after the massacre, the national media descended upon this neighborhood, and what was projected to the nation was a neighborhood, a city, and a region united against hate. In Squirrel Hill, Andy Sheehan, KDKA News.
It was a split-second decision that saved his life, but left him with a pain that will haunt him forever.
Up next, Rabbi Jeffrey Myers reflects on the heartbreaking decision to leave some of his congregants behind when Remember, Repair, Together continues.
Remember, Remember.Repair.Together, a KDKA special.
As the gunfire rang out last October 27th, Rabbi Jeffrey Myers of the Tree of Life found himself faced with the toughest decision of his life, one that he had to make in a split second. Run to help save his congregants or run to save his own life.
The rabbi yelled out to his congregants, but only a few made it out the back door in time. Then Myers barricaded himself in a bathroom.
It's a choice, he says, that will haunt him for the rest of his life. Here's Megan Schiller.
It's the image seen around the world. Rabbi Myers running away from the synagogue, his hand on his head, and a Pittsburgh police officer, gun drawn. I had the chance to talk to Rabbi Myers his first time back to the synagogue, and now, 1 year later, he reflects on what has changed.
I was on the phone with 911 for about 20 minutes, which seemed like an eternity. I'm really not sure how long I was there until the SWAT team extricated me from the building because the active shooter was still in the building.
Now, 1 year later, he fights through each new day for the 11 lost.
Well, I'm standing, so I think that's pretty good testimony amongst all these lights here that I'm doing okay. It's a challenge day by day. There's no easy answer to that because I live it every hour of every day because there's no escaping it. So I've embraced what apparently my mission is, and I move forward with it day to day to take care of myself and to take care of my congregation and to see that 11 people have not died in vain.
Rabbi Myers talked with reporters late last month in the days leading up to the high holidays, adamant that he will keep working through his grief and helping his congregation find strength.
Each of us finds the strength and the courage to integrate what happened into our beings, to move forward. I refuse to let the perpetrator make me another full-time victim. I won't let it happen. I refuse. 11 too many. There will not be a 12th, as far as I'm concerned.
His struggle with survivor's guilt continues to evolve.
Initially, I did have, but I've processed it to the extent that I recognize there wasn't anything I could do. Even with the training I took with Brett Orsini through Federation, there's a limit to what any human being's capable of. And I've come to recognize I did the best I could. Had I perhaps attempted more, I probably wouldn't be standing here.
As a survivor, he's now shifted his life's mission to become a strong voice for the 11.
You very strongly said you will not allow yourself to become another victim. Were you always this feisty?
I've never been called feisty. Thank you. I guess the feistiness you see in me is that renewed energy and vigor and faith that I have to soldier onward to do the best that I can to make the world a better place.
Making him the very definition of the word feisty, lively, determined, and courageous. In Squirrel Hill, I'm Megan Schiller, KDKA News.
From the first call to 911.
To the suspect's surrender.
Up next, tracing the timeline when Remember, Repair, Together continues.
Remember, Repair, Together, a KDKA special.
What began as a dreary fall morning in Pittsburgh quickly turned into something much darker.
Services at Tree of Life, Dor Hadash, and New Light were just beginning.
And no one was prepared for the living nightmare that would follow. Once again, here's Andy Sheehan.
5898 Wilkins Avenue. The complainant says they have an active shooter in the building. A second call says they are being attacked.
Pittsburgh's darkest day began shortly before 10 o'clock. A gunman armed with an AR-15 assault rifle, 3 semi-automatic handguns, and hundreds of rounds of ammunition turned his fearsome arsenal on 24 mostly elderly worshipers gathered for Sabbath services.
Multiple gunshots are heard from the lobby, possibly 20 to 30 shots. Where's that? It's going to be at 5898 Wilkins Avenue, Tree of Life Synagogue.
The gunman burst through the lobby door firing, and then coldly and methodically he murdered, shooting defenseless members of each of the 3 congregations.
And there at the
other end of this part of the building was a man with a gun pointing it right at me.
Joe Charney and some members of the Tree of Life congregation who had gathered in the Pervin Chapel would flee and take shelter, but the gunman proceeded to kill those who couldn't. And after shooting others from congregation Dor Hadash on the stairway, he descended into the basement, where Rabbi Jonathan Perlman from the New Light congregation had hid some of his congregants in a storage closet. One of them was 87-year-old Melvin Wax, who thought the danger had passed.
So he left the storage room, and he was shot twice. You know, like all the others, he did not deserve to die. You know, he was a kind old man.
315, hold a perimeter. We're under fire. We're under fire. He's got an automatic weapon. He's firing out in front of the synagogue.
When he had killed 11 people and wounded 2 others, the gunman may have had thoughts of escape, but was confronted in the entrance doorway by Pittsburgh police. In an exchange of gunfire, he shot Officer Daniel Meade in the hand, and Michael Smeda was struck with shrapnel.
315, every available unit in the city needs to get here now. All units hold a perimeter. We're taking on AK-47 fire from out the front of the synagogue.
Jason Lando, the commander on the scene who had attended Tree of Life growing up, ordered the perimeter of his former synagogue surrounded and called in both city and county SWAT.
As long as we were being shot at, that kept his attention away from anyone else that might be hiding inside.
The gunman retreated into the building, eventually barricading himself in a third-floor office. While from their command post, police prepared their offensive. Sharpshooters took aim from a neighboring house, and with long guns drawn, the tactical team entered in search of the shooter.
7-1, contact, shots fired. Okay, 7-1, shots fired. Give me additional resources, third floor.
Volley after volley could not dislodge the fortified gunman from the office. In the shootout, 2 more officers, Pittsburgh SWAT team members Anthony Burke, would be shot in the wrist, and Timothy Matson would suffer multiple gunshot wounds. But rather than face his own demise, the gunman began negotiating for his safety.
7-1, clear the air. We have a surrender in progress. Suspects crawling out. At this time, clear the air.
What the SWAT officers did was just, it was incredible. It was some of the most heroic things I've ever witnessed. And they were the ones that went in after him. Officer Matson and his fellow officers, Officer Burke, that were in there on the SWAT team, they took bullets to save other people's lives.
And the arresting officers said as they let him out of the synagogue, the gunman stood proud of his own cowardice.
7-1, suspects talking about all these Jews need to die. We're still communicating with them.
It's chilling to think that without the heroism of these officers, the carnage that day could have been even worse. But the attack remains the worst on the Jewish people in the history of our nation. At the Tree of Life Synagogue in Squirrel Hill, Andy Sheehan, KDKA News.
Meantime, 1 year after the shooting, a trial date still has not been set for the accused gunman, Robert Bowers. He initially pleaded not guilty, but just last week, his attorneys offered a plea deal in which Bowers would plead guilty in exchange for life in prison. Prosecutors rejected that deal and say they will continue to seek the death penalty.
Up next, the future of the Tree of Life building.
Plus, the need for increased security at synagogues and the changes already made.
When Remember, Repair Together continues.
Remember, Repair, Together. A KDKA special.
Since 1953, the Tree of Life Synagogue has stood tall above the corner of Wilkins and Shady Avenues in Squirrel Hill.
In recent years, the congregation began sharing the space with 2 other congregations, Dor Hadash and New Light. But the building has sat empty for a year now.
And while leaders with Tree of Life announced plans for the future of the building last week, there is still some uncertainty for the other 2 congregations.
Once again, here's Megan Schiller.
The once shattered windows are now boarded up. A tall fence surrounds the synagogue wrapped in artwork. I talked with the leaders of the 3 congregations who once called the synagogue home about what happens next.
There's an old saying that when you bring 3 Jews together, you'll have 4 opinions.
3 very different congregations left with one decision. Do we go back?
After the shooting, all 3 congregations needed to find a new home, and we needed to find a new home immediately.
New Light moved to Beth Shalom, while Tree of Life and Dor Hadash now rent space from Rodef Shalom. But the leaders of New Light and Dor Hadash aren't sure what their futures hold.
Will we move back to the building? Unknown question. There are too many issues involved that cannot be answered at the present time.
Are we okay here at Rodef? Do we want to stay here? Do we want to commit? What do we want to do? What is our congregation going to look like?
Meanwhile, the executive director of Tree of Life says they will return, announcing plans for a reimagined space at this corner, including worship spaces, educational space, and exhibition rooms for all the artwork sent to Tree of Life over the past year.
We will be back in that building, and it will be wonderful, and it will be important to do so. But in the meantime, we continue to exist. The building doesn't make the congregation makes the building.
Still, Barb Feig says she understands the need for people to return to Tree of Life.
It's a very meaningful place to people who grew up there, who were bar bat mitzvahed there, who were married there.
Regardless of location, all 3 congregations report an increase in members since the attack. And Donna Kufel says the enthusiasm continues to grow.
I think, yes, many people who were not as active in the community have become more active. I've seen a renewal of Jewish identity through the last several months.
The very identity that Cohen believes is more important than any building.
This is not about the building. It is about a shooter who killed Jews because they were Jews. It could have been anywhere. It could have been any building whatsoever, but it was because we are Jewish.
In Squirrel Hill, Megan Schiller, KDKA News.
Armed guards, panic buttons, man traps, they are all becoming routine at local synagogues and other Jewish facilities like schools and community centers, even assisted living communities.
And the local Jewish community's chief watchdog tells me there's more vigilance than ever when it comes to monitoring potential threats. Earlier this month, on the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur, you could not miss the men with guns protecting the men, women, and children arriving at Pittsburgh synagogues to pray. There were armed guards outside the houses of worship and inside, too. Brad Orsini, the former FBI agent who now oversees security for the Pittsburgh Jewish community, says worshipers understand the importance of that visible armed presence as a deterrence. Welcome by everybody, because sometimes, there's another side of the argument.
Yeah.
This is a place of worship.
Yes.
I don't want to walk in and see somebody with a handgun.
Our community's changed. When I started this position, we had those conversations. We had conversations about the first high holidays where congregations thought, you know what, we want undercover officers. And we had to change their mindset.
The security at Brad Orsini's own workplace, the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh, gives an idea of how local synagogues are being secured post Tree of Life.
So this is our new building. We just moved in here in January of this year. We have one access point for anybody that walks in this building, only one.
And that one entrance is something. No one gets past the first set of doors without an armed guard's okay. Then you're in what they call a man trap, with a second set of doors only opened after further review. They've thought of every worst-case scenario.
We've put bullet-resistant drywall on our whole perimeter. If you can feel the weight of this door, it's reinforced steel, and it is bullet-resistant. This is the Alamo right here, right?
And there's more of what they call target hardening. So these windows look like normal windows.
And they are normal windows. The difference with these windows are we have a protective film on it. And we've done this in a lot of our facilities now.
So without the coating, a few gunshots and this thing shatters. With the coating, it's just a bullet hole.
It's a bullet hole, correct.
Can't get in.
Can't get in.
Less visible is something employees here and at local synagogues now have immediate access to in the event of an emergency panic buttons to reach 911.
On the pulpit, right there? Not only on the pulpit, but remote. So you could carry them on a lanyard. Ushers, greeters are wearing them around their neck. It's instant response.
You used to work at the FBI.
Yes.
Do you feel as safe here as you did at the FBI office?
Yes.
Safer?
I wouldn't say safer, because at the FBI office you have a building of people carrying guns. But yes, this is about as safe as you can be.
But to try to be safer still, here and at all local Jewish facilities, Orsini strives to get the word out that those capable of acts of terror often telegraph their intentions. They tell somebody they may talk about or post about a grievance.
Somebody knows that something's not quite right. We have to tell our community about that. We have to talk about it. So if something is an anomaly with an individual they may know, they need to report it.
Report that, he says, and all acts of anti-Semitism.
This graffiti was on a warehouse in Lawrenceville. This happened the day after the Tree of Life. This was last year at a sukkah in White Oak. And if you take a look, bacon over a pole, and the verbiage here basically talks about you live like pigs, you might as well eat them too.
Of course, vandalism's a crime, but what about the flyers promoting the KKK and other white supremacist groups that have turned up in Squirrel Hill and elsewhere?
Our goal, hopefully, is maybe our community will see somebody put this up. Maybe our community will be in the position to snap a picture of the individual, snap a license plate of the individual.
They're not breaking the law, though.
They're not breaking the law. You're absolutely right. And there is a difference between hate speech and hate crime. But we know hate speech can lead into a hate crime, and that's what we're trying to avoid. This is hate speech, and we're going to look at it. We're going to analyze it. We're going to assess it. We're going to try to figure out who's sending it to us. We're going to report it to law enforcement, make sure they have it. We can't live in a day and age where our community dismisses this as just anti-Semitism. That ship has sailed. We need to report everything.
Every week at local Jewish facilities, they are training and drilling for active shooter scenarios. They're teaching people how to stop a victim's bleeding and other first aid.
And Jewish leaders encourage other faiths to be vigilant as well, in light of what we have seen in Charleston and Christchurch, to name but two. In fact, Brett Orsini has offered security seminars at local churches and mosques. Up next, Tree of Life members take a trip of healing to a church where the parishioners know their pain all too well.
When Remember, Repair Together continues.
Remember, Repair, Together. A KDKA special.
Members of a church in Charleston, South Carolina know exactly what the Tree of Life family has been going through since last October. They endured a hate-filled massacre of their own 4 years ago.
In January, just 3 months after the shooting in Squirrel Hill, members of the two congregations met face-to-face, sharing Christian and Jewish customs in a search for peace and understanding.
Lynn Hayes Freeland was invited to join them in Charleston for the trip of healing.
Charleston, South Carolina is considered by some to be one of the most beautiful, peaceful cities in the United States. There's a lot of history here that goes back to the early 1800s, but there's recent history here too. Ugly history that connects Pittsburgh and Charleston together forever. Charleston, South Carolina is one of the most historic towns in the South, from the Revolutionary War to the slave uprisings led by Charleston's son, Denmark Vesey. It is recent history, however, that brought a unique group of Pittsburghers to the city. October 27th, 2018, a date that Pittsburgh will never forget. Robert Bowers entered the Tree of Life Synagogue in a hate-filled rage. He shot and killed 11 people, 3 from the New Light congregation. It was an act that is hard for anyone to come to terms with, especially family members left behind.
At this point in time, I'm not prepared to forgive. I'm still on the angry side of things.
I know that time does do some healing, And it hasn't been long enough for me.
In the weeks that followed the tragic shooting, family, friends, and congregants grappled with grief and mourning, looking for answers and finding few places to turn. Yet 650 miles away sits Mother Emanuel AME Church, a congregation that knows firsthand how it feels to have hate enter a religious space. In June of 2015, Dylan Ruth entered the basement Bible study here and shot and killed 9 members of their church.
I was under the table looking up, and when he got to me, he said, "Shut up." "Did I shoot you?" And I said, "No." He said, "I'm not going to. I'm going to leave you here to tell the story."
Polly Shepard is one of the Emanuel Church shooting survivors, one of those who 3 years later can talk to members of New Light congregation about hurt, healing, and forgiveness.
I tell them, you have to forgive. It's a choice. Either you forgive or you don't. But if you carry it with you, there's no healing. It's like acid on a battery. Once it builds up, the car won't move.
The trip was the idea of Dr. Peg Durachko. Her husband, Dr. Richard Godfrey, died in the Tree of Life massacre. For her, one of the hardest things was just getting here.
Leaving was very difficult because I'm traveling without my husband. But I remember what really struck me was the ability of the people who were in that church to forgive so readily. And that intrigued me, and it actually drew me because I want to learn forgiveness.
These Pittsburghers found their way through Charleston in search of answers and in hopes of finding some form of peace.
I would like to also learn a little more about the healing that has taken place from 2015, which is when the tragedy occurred here, up until now.
The highlight for some on this trip, like Carol Black, Godfrey's sister, is the Sunday morning worship service at the very church where 9 people died.
Get a chance to blend those two congregations and you know, we actually see where it happened. It's still kind of raw for us.
Reverend Eric Manning was not the pastor here when the shooting took place, but he has been a big part of the healing process. Emanuel welcomed the visitors from Pittsburgh, but also recognized their own healing is still a work in progress.
It brought back, from Mother Emanuel's perspective, what we went through just about 4 years ago, and our road to recovery is still taking place. And you see yet another congregation who's just starting out. Our hearts go out to them because we know the road is long.
The message on this Sunday dealt with forgiveness and trusting God. But it was this moment that touched these 2 congregations in a way that no one anticipated. The members of New Light congregation were invited to come to the front of the church and line the altar. Then the members of Emanuel AME congregation were invited to surround them there, both physically and in love.
I want you all to understand this congregation understands what you have gone through, what you're going through. You are not alone in this journey. We will be here. We will be there. All you need to do is just pick up the phone. Call us any hour of the night, any hour of the day.
As these 2 congregations, both victims of hatred, came together, they began to hug. They began to cry. And there was what seemed to be a release of pain and hurt that had been kept inside for a long time.
Being surrounded by all that love and support was so healing, so healing.
The outpouring of love
was just totally amazing, and I feel like I accomplished what I came here to do, which is to hug the people in this church, and they were just awesome.
How's your heart feeling?
Well, it's still broken, but I feel a camaraderie even closer with the people here now.
Yes.
And it was beautiful.
The people from Pittsburgh who went on that trip told Lynn it was a step in the right direction on their path toward healing.
Up next, the lives of two brothers killed at Tree of Life live on in a new social media campaign.
When Remember.Repair.Together continues.
Remember, Repair, Together. A KDKA special.
A free cup of coffee, a compliment said with a smile, an unexpected tip at the checkout counter.
All random acts of kindness, the type of kindness brothers Cecil and David Rosenthal embodied every day.
Megan Schiller explains how their kindness now lives on through the generous actions of others, thanks to a new mission born on social media.
We've seen people making soup when somebody's sick.
It's called #LoveLikeTheBoys.
The teacher asked the classroom for each student to do a random act of kindness and to share it on this board. So as you can see, this board is filled.
A social media mission to show kindness with no expectation of getting anything in return.
Achievement supports people with disabilities, and we in fact supported Cecil and David Rosenthal for over 20 years. And so after the tragedy at the Tree of Life, we just felt we wanted to do something.
Something to honor the lives of David and Cecil. Their mental disabilities instead merely gave them the ability to only love and never hate.
They could teach us all something about this world, and the fact that they knew no barriers of any kind and that they just loved unconditionally is what's important.
The inseparable duo got around Squirrel Hill, and they quickly bonded with the staff at Achieva.
They never, went to a place where they didn't meet a friend somewhere. You always ended up being friends with them somehow.
And because of their kindness, Dave Tinkle said donations keep coming in.
Over $170,000 from over 700 people in 40 plus states in the U.S. as well as 4 countries.
And from that money, the David and Cecil Rosenthal Fund was born, awarded to another disabled person who shows kindness in the community. A small but beautiful gesture to be more like the boys.
No matter how small your act is, as long as you do something good to give back to this world, it makes it a better place and it makes you feel good.
And if you want to keep your kindness anonymous, you can do that too with these printable coupons. They say, enjoy this random act of kindness in memory of Cecil and David Rosenthal. You can attach it to cash or a cup of coffee so people will understand the message, and then they can share it on social media to keep that momentum going. In Squirrel Hill, I'm Megan Schiller, KDKA News.
Up next, the service is set for this October 27th.
And we pay special tribute to the 11 lives lost.
When Remember, Repair Together continues.
Remember, Repair, Together. A KDKA special.
The Tree of Life, Dor Hadash, and New Light congregations, along with various other religious and civic organizations, will mark Sunday with a commemorative day of service, study, and community. There will be community service projects and Torah study.
The 1027 Healing Partnership will also host drop-in hours at the Jewish Community Center's Kaufman Building with mental health and spiritual care providers on hand.
And finally, there will be a public memorial at Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hall in Oakland. It begins at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. All are welcome.
In the past year, Pittsburgh has endured a pain unlike anything ever before in the city's history.
Yet somehow we've found strength amid the sadness.
Because we must go on.
And we will.
For Pittsburgh, for the survivors.
And most importantly, for the 11 beautiful souls lost, whose light will shine on forever, even in darkness.